You'll notice in this particular case, the invoice that I just loaded is a very dressed up format than a normal actual invoice. Planning, forecasting, budgeting, these are all vital ingredients for a successful business. Very often they're overlooked. It's really important to understand the significance of budgeting for the overall success of an organization. We budget in order to align our activities with the strategy and the objectives of the company. We always need to know where we're headed. What are our 5-year goals, 3 years, 2 years? What about the next year? Without these goals, it's hard to keep ourselves on the right focus and headed in the right direction. A budget helps us realize what the cost drivers are for the expenses that'll lead us to these objectives. Budget will also help us make better investment decisions. They're also typically required by our lenders when we're going for loans. Most importantly, though, our investment dollars are limited. We have to make some serious decisions on what to do with our resources. Budgets help us look at all the avenues of where our funding can go. Our budgets also are there to provide an early warning of operational problems. If we know that it should be roughly costing us $1,000 a week in labor, and suddenly it's $5,000, it tells us that something's going on, and it allows us to focus our attention in that area. Most importantly, when we have a budget, we have the assurance that our colleagues and our staff are working in the right direction. We know now that the decisions that we've made are being implemented as we intended them to because we see the results in our financials. When you prepare a budget, it's important to review your prior period's data, but this isn't enough for a good budget. When we budget, we have to create some reasonable assumptions. Will the cost of goods stay the same? Will my labor stay the same? Will labor go up? Will labor go down? These are all assumptions that I need to develop. When I develop them, I can then tie them with my revenues to come up with a good forecast. Traditionally, we like to know exactly what we expect from our revenues, but again, we have to go back to our assumptions. One of the best ways to determine my revenue is to know how much my customers plan on spending the next year. After I know my revenues, then I can calculate the cost of goods sold. Remember earlier, I have some assumptions in my mind as to whether prices will go up or down. Now that I've come up with my revenue expectations based on feedback and research, I can come up with some good numbers. When I do, I can then go into my other operational costs and apply them. It's in this area that we tend to use percentages. I'll think in terms of utilities being 5% of sales. My labor is maybe 25% of my sales. I'll try to come up with some percentages rather than dollars and cents. That way, I can do a little bit more what-if planning and come up with more scenarios. This is also going to help me project exactly what I expect on the bottom line at the end of the year. When I'm determining these projections, I'll look at facts, beliefs, and then determine my projections. You'll notice my data is fact, my assumptions are belief. In order to do this, I'll use the data that I've looked at and I'll establish some guidelines. Now again, I'm not going to look just on past performance. I'm going to think in terms of what happened last year that is going to happen again in the future, and what happened last year that's unusual and will not reoccur. In doing so, I'll set a really solid budget. Let's talk about some other do's and don'ts. First, don't lose sight of the objective. Think about what your problems were from the previous year, divide solutions, and increase costs accordingly. Remember, our goal is to increase profit. So think in terms of, is there any waste that you can eliminate? Are there any controls that we're lacking? Estimate your income estimate your expenses and cash flow, and talk it through with other people. Whatever you do, don't budget 100% of the previous year. We find that coming up with the assumptions on what we predict is so important. Also, don't assume that sales are going to be fantastic. Bigger is not always better. Realistic is what we're looking for. Remember, if your budget is unrealistic, it'll fail. If it's arbitrary, totally useless. The idea is to give yourself a solid plan for the upcoming year.